Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. Every year, this is one of my very favorite videos to record. Now, most year it's not also one of the only videos I recorded, but we had another challenging year over here. It wasn't even a bad year, but there was a lot of transition, a lot of new beginnings and starting over, and a lot of challenges. So I didn't exactly have the space for this, but I missed it, and I'm happy to be back. During this year, I read 100 books. Now, it's not all about numbers, especially with me. It's just not something I put a lot of stock in. But it is cool to kind of have a goal and meet it. But more than anything, when you read that many books, chances are you're going to read some of your all-time favorite books. And that's what's so exciting to me about being a reader, is you never know when you're going to read your next favorite book. And this year I definitely got to some of my favorites. So I'm really excited to show you guys what all I read. It's not going to be your standard top 10 list. This isn't a list of top 10 books. I've got some generalized stuff in here, but I'm going to show you my favorite things I read all year. I had to make some hard cuts. I'm trying not to do the 5 honorable mention things. I'm trying to keep it short and sweet. So without further ado, let me show you my top 10 favorite things I read all year long. For number 10, I chose The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Now, this is a book that sat on my shelf for far too long. I don't know what I was thinking. You should read this. It's a nice, manageable size. It's a pretty easy read. It is a Greek retelling, which I love Greek mythology, so again, don't know why it sat on the shelf for so long. But at its heart, this book is a romance. And you guys, if you've been here for a while, you know I'm not a romance reader. But oh, it worked. It worked so well for me. The way this is written is just absolutely beautiful. And what makes it so special, though, is you will fall in love with these characters right alongside with them. Beautifully written, just stunning. Please check it out. You're going to like it. During 2024, I tried to make it a point to read more independently published books, and I read several that were absolute gems, favorites moving forward. My favorite one that I read is also my number 9 book of 2024, and it is The Crimes of Rooker, Flynn. After I read his debut novel, The Legend of Blackjack, I became friends with Andy, aka the author A.R. Witham. And I really loved that book. I recommend you read it first. I have a review. You can check it out. But when I heard that this series was coming, I was like, okay, this is such a cool idea because I love the world. It's wildly imaginative and fun and unique. So it makes sense that even though The Legend of Blackjack can totally read as a standalone, it makes sense to write more in this world. So I'm so happy that he chose this character, Rooker Flynn, to just go. So personally, I'm still always going to recommend that you read The Legend of Blackjack first. But he intentionally made it to where you can start here if you want to. And it might be a good idea for some of you guys because this book is definitely more adult than The Legend of Blackjack. I had so much fun with this. It was funny because Andy is just naturally so hilarious. It had me on the edge of my seat, one of the biggest cliffhangers I read all year, and it was just an action-packed adventure that's like, this is why we read fantasy. This is why we read fun adventure books. It's for feelings like this book gave me. So please check this out. They're on Kindle Unlimited. He narrates the audiobooks, which sometimes is hit and miss when an author takes control of his own audiobook, but Andy was born to read audiobooks. So let him tell you this story and get this book ASAP. In 2024, I was hoping to read a lot of Guy Gavriel Kay. It was like one of my hopes and dreams for the year, was that this was going to be the year of Guy Gavriel Kay. Now, I only read 2 Guy Gavriel Kay books, and they were both really, really good. But for my number 8 slot, I chose The Line of Alran. I loved this book. It felt real. It's hard to put my finger on exactly what I mean when I say that. But everything about this and just the way he writes historically fiction-fueled fantasy makes you feel like you are in the book living this story with real people. They're believable. They're gritty. They are just memorable. I loved this book so much. I had the fun chance to read it alongside with my friend Brent. We both had a great time with it. I also read Tigana this year. Very, very good. So here's to 2025, hopefully being the year of more Guy Gavriel Kay, because so far, everything I've read by this man, I have loved. I never ended up making a 2023 top 10. Maybe I'll do that, like super, super belated. But the Sarantine Mosaic by Gavriel Kay was definitely one of my top 3 things I read in 2023. I loved it. And this just gives me more of the same vibes. It's completely different. It is its own thing. It's not in the same world. But this is an author that you can read any page from any of his books blind and know exactly who's writing it because his style seems so distinct to me. And I love that. Like, I think that's really special. So pick up some Guy Gavriel Kay. You can start here if you want to. But really, like I said, I've read 4 books so far and they've all 4 been winners. So start wherever you like. Just grab one. For number 7, I don't have any physical books to show you. This is something I've completely done on audio, but they are available on Kindle as well. It is Lit RPG, and it is Battle Mage Farmer by Seth Ring. Okay, so this year I have spent a little more time on Instagram, and just like there's BookTube, there's a whole side of Instagram called Bookstagram. And I came across this account by a man named Noah, and Noah influenced me to try Battle Mage Farmer. What can I say about Battle Mage Farmer? It is Lit RPG. If you think Lit RPG is not for you, I mean, who am I to say? Maybe it's not for you. I did not think it was going to be for me either, because the whole progression setup just kind of didn't sound like it'd be something I was interested in, and I've never really been a gamer, so it's like, it's just not really my thing. But Battle Mage Farmer, he had a whole month where he read only Lit RPG, and I'm sitting there following along and listening to these recommendations. And when he said Battle Mage Farmer, I thought that could not sound cheesier. But I had a little bit of free time. I wanted something fun and light. And the first audiobook was free on Audible. It's included in my membership. And I saw that Michael Kramer read it, so I was like, you know what? Noah has enjoyed these books so much that I think I'm going to give it a try. I went in and my expectation was, I'm going to listen to this first book. It's probably going to be fun. It's going to be, a throwaway, and I'll move on with my life. Well, I did not move on with my life. The Battle Mage Farmer series is about a retired battle mage who is now a farmer. Stuff happens, as I'm sure you can assume. But man, this story just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but in a really nice, consumable way. It is a side series for me. It's never going to be one of these, great pieces of literature that I put on my Mount Rushmore. But gosh darn it, if I didn't have a blast every single time I was reading one of these books. I'm completely caught up with the series now, and I find myself counting down to the next one. So if you're looking for something fun that's still very heavily fantasy fueled, that gives you all those, all the magic and the scope of fantasy, but still feels more like lunch rather than dinner, you should definitely check out Battle Mage Farmer. I'm telling you guys, it's really good. Number 6 for me was Ken Follett's A World Without End. Actually, it's just called World Without End. Scratch that. I don't know if you can tell in this video with the way things are skewed, but this is a absolutely massive paperback. Ken Follett is known for being long-winded, and I'm known for loving long-winded books, and this one was no exception. So Ken Follett is most well known, in our world at least, for The Pillars of the Earth, one of the most iconic historical fiction books of all time. It's one of my favorite books. I love it. My expectations were tempered when it came to the rest of the books in this Kingbridge series. Now, Pillars of the Earth can absolutely be read as a standalone. It is a standalone. But this little area of the world, his historical fiction world, is called Kingsbridge. And he has written, I believe, 5 novels in this Kingsbridge area. But they all take place 300-400 years apart from each other. So it's not a series where it's one continual story. It's several standalones that take place in this same area. I loved this book. I was so worried that nothing could live up to Pillars of the Earth, but I might have liked this one better. I'm not totally sure. I'd have to sit there and think about it apples to apples, because Pillars of the Earth still has some of the most memorable characters I've ever read in my life. But I may have liked the setting and the plot of this one even a little better. It just held my attention from the very first page to the last. And when we're talking about a 1,300 page book, that is impressive. So if you enjoyed Pillars of the Earth, but you weren't sure about venturing into his other stuff, at least check out this one. I hope to read more in 2025, but so far I'm 2 for 2 with the Kingsbridge series. I love them both. For number 5, I was able to check something off of my lifetime bucket list, and I read The Count of Monte Cristo. Let's take a moment to really appreciate this gorgeous edition. I didn't do much reading from the actual text because this thing is huge and heavy, but I did enjoy the audiobook so much. I have wanted to read this book, like I said, my whole life. Let me set this down. It is heavy. And it didn't let me down. I was intimidated by the size. I was intimidated by how old it was. You just never know how something like that's going to read with a modern mindset. But I loved it. Now, there were times when I was reading it where I was thinking, I understand why there are so many abridged versions of this. But by the time it was all said and done, and Edmond Dante's plan for revenge fully played out, I was like, wait a second, never mind. I understand why every word of that story was included. Just brilliant. I mean, the tension that built was so palpable. The dialogue that he wrote was some of the best I've ever written. So don't worry, if you've never read this and you want to, don't worry about the fact that it's an old book. It will not lose you. The writing style is still just as effective and gripping and exciting today as it ever has been. So absolutely love The Count of Monte Cristo, and that's why it's number 5 for me. It's hard for me to do these videos without something in my hands, and I don't have this physical book, so I'm going to hold my clipboard. Now, I do own the physical book, but someone's borrowing it, because since the moment I read this book, way back in, what was that, March or April? I had a good couple months all clumped together, so it all runs together. But ever since I finished this book in the spring, I have been lending it to people. So far, my brother has read it, my husband has read it, my sister-in-law has read it. I've had 2 different friends read it, and plus a ton of people on, Discord and YouTube and Bookstagram. I feel like I have directly influenced probably 15 people to read this book because I can't stop talking about it. I loved it so much. If you haven't guessed already, it is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. Just one of the best books I've ever written. And the only reason it's not number 1 is because I have some major bangers coming up to tell you guys about that are a little more in my genre wheelhouse. Demon Copperhead is what I'm guessing is called literary fiction. Some people are calling it this might even be like included on the back of the book, a David Copperfield retelling, but it's not that heavy-handed. Demon Copperhead was an absolutely beautiful, heartbreaking story of a boy growing up in the West Virginia area in the late 1990s. Heartbreaking is probably one of the best words I can think of to describe it, but it didn't end on a depressing note that felt heavy or, yucky. It felt hopeful in the end. But man, something about the way this woman writes a story just absolutely spoke to me, and I couldn't put it down. And ever since I've read it, I can't stop thinking about it or talking about it. I've said I've recommended it to so many people. That's just because I want the ability to keep talking about it. I will reread this book many, many, many more times in my life, I already know. So, man, if you are at all interested in reading something that is S-tier, 5-star excellence, but maybe is completely out of your wheelhouse, something different. Maybe you're going through a little bit of a slump with fantasy or sci-fi, or maybe you just read the best fantasy book you've ever read and you're not sure what to read next. Switch up your genre and read something else that's going to be a favorite. And I just don't understand how anyone could read Demon Copperhead and not just absolutely love it. So That's it. Number 4 for me all year long was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. For number 3, we are going to talk Sun Eater. I am a huge fan of the Sun Eater series. I'm a huge fan of Christopher Rocchio. And this year, not only did we get Disquiet Gods, and it's right here on the list, number 3, but I also caught up on some of these novellas that he has written. And I just want to say real quick that Queen Amid Ashes is one of my favorite things that Rocchio has written. Absolutely do not skip these novellas. They are so good. So this is just a side note. This is one of my favorite things he's ever written. It was excellent. But right before I read it, I read Dregs of the Empire, which is another novella that is in publication order right before Disquiet Gods. I cannot recommend doing it this way enough because it had me primed and ready. And man, reading this book was just, it felt so good to be back in the Stolen Empire and just reading Rocchio's writing. I love this story. I love these characters, and I love the fact that I have no idea where it's going. We're in for a surprise, and that's so good. So I am planning a 2025 Sun Eater reread because the whole time I'm reading this, I thought, this is all I want to read. I want to go back and completely start over so I can, just get more. And right now, the best way for me to get more is to start from the beginning and go back. And for me, there's nothing that screams favorite books and best series ever than the urge to read it again. And the fact that while I was reading this, I wanted more, that's just so good. For number 2, I am going with a series that after I was finished, the way I described it to people was 5 stars, do not recommend. What do I mean by that? Well, I read The Second Apocalypse by R. Scott Baker, and this series was the grimmest grim book I've ever read. It was the darkest dark series I have ever read. Some of this was hard to get through. This is heavy. This is weird. This is trippy. This is not normally what I like to read. When I started reading this, by the way, I'm holding up The Warrior Prince. This is book 2 in the first series. I couldn't pick just one to hold up, so I just picked this one because I loved it so much. But guys, while I was reading this, I'm thinking, why do I like this? This is not normally what I read. I'm not a huge fan of military fantasy. This is military fantasy. I'm not a huge fan of stuff that is very philosophical. This is philosophical. I like a pretty straightforward story. I like stuff that's very character driven. Guys, this is both. It is a story, a good story. A unique story, a cool story. But it's not that straightforward. And the characters are incredibly written. But there's not really any good ones, okay? Why did I like this so much? I can't even tell you. It was gross and weird and heavy. But I loved it. My friend Brent, this is one of his favorite fantasy series of all times, and I knew how it impacted him and how impressed he was with it, and he kept wanting me to read it, and I honestly did not think that I was going to like it. And I had had the first book on my shelf for quite some time, and so I thought, I'm going to read it, and I'm going to throw him a bone, and I'm going to find a way to be like, oh, it's just not really for me, which wouldn't really shock anybody because this series is not for everybody. So if somebody told me they read it and they didn't like it, I would understand. So I get into that first book and I'm, 30, 50% into the first book, and I'm still going, what's going on? Like, what am I reading? But something happened in that second half of the first book, and I was absolutely sucked in and obsessed. And I did not read them all back to back necessarily, but I read all 7 books in 2 months because I could not get enough. Now, I want to specify there are 2 series. There's a trilogy and a quartet. But get that idea out of your mind. You have to read all 7 books. If you read the first book and you like it, you have to read all 7 books. It's called The Prince of Nothing is the first trilogy, and Aspect Emperor is the name of the quartet. But if you've only read the trilogy, then you stopped at intermission. You stopped at halftime. The story is not a tag-on series. No. The series is 7 books. Read all 7 books. If you're going to read it. If you're not going to read it, I don't blame you, because this book was batshit crazy. This whole series. But I loved it. I cannot wait to read this again. In fact, I keep telling myself, don't reread it yet. You don't have time for this. You have other new things you want to get to. You have other rereads you want to get to. I'm not letting myself reread this until 2026. But I absolutely will, because it was so good. Absolutely, easily my second favorite thing I read all year long. All right, for my number 1, there's a little bit of a trend here with a trilogy followed up by a quartet. I loved Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I read that a couple of years ago, and I thought it was just an absolutely wonderful fantasy trilogy. I think about it all the time. Some incredible world building, some of my favorite characters ever written in fantasy. What's not to like about Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams? Well, there's a quartet that follows Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. But get that idea out of your head. You need to start considering it a 7-book series. A 7-book series with a couple novellas. And yes, you have to read them all. Because the series I'm talking about is The Last King of Ostenard. And it is the follow-up series to Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And it is perfect. It is fantasy perfection. So the book I'm going to show you is Empire of Grass. And this is book 2 of the follow-up quartet to Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And the series is called The Last King of Ostenard, and every single book was incredible. Like, this is why I read fantasy. Books like this are what makes everything worth it. These books are long. These books have tons of POVs. They span kingdoms and new lands, and they expand on Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. But oh my gosh, they're perfect. So if you like Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn even a little bit, I highly recommend these. I really liked Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, but these books, these 4 Last King of Ostenard books, have elevated Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn for me and made it an all-time favorite series. Kind of like with the Sun Eater stuff. There are some novellas. I also read these this year. There's one called, hold on. There's one called The Heart of What Was Lost. And then there's this guy, Brothers of the Wind. Please don't skip them. The Heart of What Was Lost, you read that one in between Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn and before you start The Last King of Ostenard. So that one's like an in-between of the 2 series. This one, you read this guy after Empire of Grass and before Into the Narrow Dark. They just enhanced the main books so much. But I could sit here for several minutes and just gush about how much I enjoyed my time with Tad Williams and his incredible fantasy characters in his world of Ostenard. But honestly, in the end, you just got to check it out for yourself. If you haven't read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, this is me saying, start it this year for sure. It's so good. If you have read it and just decided to stop because, there are 4 more big books. 4 big books plus 2 novellas I'm telling you not to skip. That's a lot to chew, but it is worth it. Not only did I like it more than Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, I think, but like I said, it elevated the whole experience and just made it feel complete. So, hands down, absolutely, my time with Tad Williams was my number 1 favorite thing I read this year. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for clicking the link, for watching the video. for watching the whole thing. If you did, that's incredible. And thanks for checking out my top 10 favorite things I read in 2024. I had such a good reading year. Please tell me in the comments not only what were your favorite things that you read, but have you read any of these? And like, are you considering reading any of them if you hadn't thought of it yet? Because I'm throwing some big stuff at you guys, but look at me. Look how much fun I had. Don't you want that to be you? So check out the books I'm talking about and let's talk about them in the comments. Send me DM, whatever you like. I read books so that I can talk about them. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be making this video, and I'm really hoping to see you guys a lot more in 2025.